This is Transformation Ground Control, your source for all things business, technology, strategy, and change. If you're growing your business, leading change within your organization, or undertaking any sort of operational or technology change initiative, this podcast is for you. This show covers what you need to know about digital transformation, organizational change, operational improvement, and business growth.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And now, here's your host, Eric Kimberling.
Hello and welcome to Transformation Ground Control podcast episode number 30. I'm here with Kyler Cheatham. Kyler, thanks for being here again today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Great show today. This is the podcast that's all things digital and business transformation, including strategy, change, technology, all that good stuff. And today's episode is no different. I've got a great show planned for you today. We're going to start off the show by talking about some recent developments in the ERP software industry with Odoo, which is an open source software provider receiving a bunch of private equity investments. So we're going to talk about that sort of headline story here in just a moment. And then later in the show, we are going to have Wayne Cavanaugh, who's the CEO of a company called Ninja Nation, which is a consumer service type of organization. We'll do more of a proper introduction later. But we're going to have him on the show to talk about a couple things. Not only is he going to be on talking about growing and scaling a small and mid-sized business from the perspective of a CEO and founder, but he's also a former private equity guy. So we ask a lot of questions, or we're going to ask a lot of questions about some of the similarities that he sees as an entrepreneur growing and scaling a company and what he would look for and how he would help scale companies as a private equity investor. So it's going to be a really good conversation, especially if you're in a high growth industry or environment where you're looking to scale your business. We're going to come at it from all angles, not just technology, but also looking at business and strategy and operations and how to scale your organization for growth. So we'll bring Wayne on the show a little bit later. And then, of course, after that interview, Kyler and I will dive into some of the threads or themes from that interview and unpack those a little bit more for the audience here today. But before we get to all that, before we bring Wayne on the show, tell us a bit about this story with Odoo that we came across recently, Kyler.
Yeah, definitely. So Summit Partners has invested $250 million into Odoo, which is an open source business management system, which you mentioned. And its value right now as a company is just over $2 billion. So the reason this is so interesting and kind of goes with the theme of our entrepreneurial episode today is because it started as a startup and is still ran by the founder and CEO actually out of Belgium, which isn't really known for tech startups. So it's kind of created this really interesting new model that monetizes the open source opportunity or offering free products in the ERP space and then for paid subscriptions. So I think that this is just such an interesting development because of the overall open source infrastructure. So I think that's a good place to kind of start in asking you, Eric, maybe you can help us understand what is an open source system and how is it different from quote unquote a traditional ERP system?
Yeah, it's a great question. And first of all, I'll say that this is a really interesting conversation, not only for the reasons you just mentioned, which is that it's an entrepreneur, it's a high growth situation, private equity involvement, and we're talking about scale throughout this episode, but also because Odoo is a recent entrant into our top 10 rankings, our annual top 10 ERP systems. It cracked the top 10 this year for the first time. It was in our top 10 in the past for small businesses, but never our full-blown general ranking. So it's very timely in that regard. And by the way, if you're interested in that, that's a white paper you can download. We have links below in the description for this podcast to download our annual transformation report and our top 10 rankings. But to answer your question, what exactly open source is and how it's different, open source has been around for a long time. It just hasn't really gained traction until I'd say the last 3 or 5 years. It's continuing to gain traction. I view open source as sort of the antidote to the super structured or rigid proprietary ERP systems that allow you to configure it, but they don't let you do a lot more with it unless you hire a bunch of expensive consultants to come in and do it for you using their proprietary, tool set and their proprietary knowledge of the software. Open source, on the other hand, is meant to be flexible. It's sort of the opposite extreme where it's you own the source code. You can do whatever you want to the source code. Customization isn't necessarily a bad thing. It just still doesn't mean you should go overboard with it, because you have a tendency to want to break things when you start customizing too much. But if you have a fair amount of technical proficiency and you're looking for something that's really flexible that you can maintain yourself and really mold to fit what you want versus just settling for what a normal off-the-shelf system can handle. Odoo or ERP Next is another example of an open source system that's fairly popular. Those are the two leading examples of open source systems. And the other thing I'll mention too is that Odoo in particular is a very modular system. So a lot of smaller companies will start off with just like the CRM module or just the financial module, and then you sort of bolt on other modules. And in theory, all ERP systems are built that way, but Odoo is particularly modular in that way, and that you don't have to implement everything to get it to work. Like SAP, for example, you sort of have to implement most of the solution just to get it to work. You can't just turn off certain parts of it because it's all so interrelated. So Odoo can be, a good option for smaller companies that are growing and scaling, because you can grow into it. But if you would ask me about open source 10 years ago, and I'm sure there's still documented evidence of this out there on the internet, I was not a fan of open source back 10 years ago, just because it was such an emerging, immature technology. But now, Odoo and now ERP Next have come a long way and have made it a lot more viable.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we'll try not to have our audience surface any of those videos. Whatever was on the internet 10 years ago should just be deleted in my eye at this point.
Yeah, exactly.
So what kind of companies are good for an open source or a system like Odoo? Is there a specific industry, or do they tailor to any sort of niche market?
Yeah, there's a lot of markets that they appeal to. We've seen it more in manufacturing and distribution types of organizations, but to be fair, that's a biased sample, because more, a lot of our clients are manufacturing and distribution companies. So, it could just be because that's our client base, and so we're seeing it more there. We don't see it as a viable option as much with like a big company, like a Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 type of company. That's, they're more likely to want to go with an intentionally more standardized or rigid sort of a system, because they're trying to drive more efficiency and sort of operational maturity out of their operations, whereas a small or high growth company is looking for flexibility, as a broad generalization. So I'd say, I don't know that there's any certain industry that is better or worse for open source, but I would say company size is probably a bigger indicator. If you're a small or mid-sized company, it could make more sense. If you're really small and you don't have an IT staff, I think it might be overwhelming to try and manage it, especially if you start to mess with the source code or go in and change it too much. That might be a bit much, but it could be a good kind of opposite option to something like a NetSuite, which is built for small and mid-sized companies, but it's a software as a service, sort of more of a rigid ERP system.
Right, definitely. And then when a lot of times you hear Odoo kind of in their pitches, they talk about being built for non-technical users. And that's the one thing that I don't know that I would, in my, very untrained opinion, agree with. It seems like sometimes Odoo or the open source system might need a bit more of a technical support because of the modular structure and just making sure everything fits together. And I wondered if you could kind of weigh your opinion on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, this is a topic I would love to talk about with like the CEO of Odoo. I would love to have him on the show, and I know he listens to and reads our stuff. So if you're listening, please come on our show. Just email us. We'd love to have you on here. But because I think open source is a fascinating emerging technology. But what I'll say is, just on my experience, and to be candid, my personal open source experience is much more limited than the traditional off the shelf traditional ERP systems. But from what I've seen and the way I've seen Odoo evolve and other open source systems evolve over time in recent years, is that yes, you can do some stuff with just more as a business user, not as a technology expert. But if you want to get the full benefit of that open source aspect of being able to integrate and change the software, integrate to other systems, tie together multiple modules, there's just a certain amount of complexity and sophistication you're going to have as an organization. And I know that's the way they market themselves. And it is a very, I would say about Odoo, it's got a clean interface. It's, it's user friendly, I would say, relatively speaking to other systems out there. But the back end of it, I think that's where companies can get overwhelmed with the hidden technical complexities of tying it all together and making it do what you want it to do. And you also have to look at too, whereas you look at like an SAP or an Oracle or a Microsoft, you've got, thousands and thousands of resources out there throughout the world, tens of thousands of resources in most cases that support that product. They know that product inside and out. Odoo doesn't have quite that level of ecosystem support yet. Maybe someday they will, but right now they don't. So you combine those two things.
Yeah, that's a real interesting point. Yeah. Definitely. Do they have any sort of resellers or system integrators that specialize in Odoo?
Yeah, they do. There's VARs out there that specialize in Odoo. There's also VARs that specialize in ERP Next. In fact, I just got an email the other day from one of the executives at ERP Next who took issue with something I said in one of my reviews about ERP Next. And of course, vendors a lot of times don't like what I say because I mentioned the good, the bad, the ugly about systems. And
sure, that never happens to you, getting those angry vendor emails.
Right. Why did Ed not give a perfect glowing review for their product, which I never do, by the way. I don't do that for anyone. Yeah. But so I think now I forgot your question. What was your question again? I got totally off track.
Oh, I was talking about the support structure because I think that's a really important thing for folks and companies to consider when thinking about an open source system. And so I had never heard of one, but it sounds like there is some that do specialize in open source. So there are people out there or partners that you could look to.
Yep. Yeah, there are. And, in theory, the whole idea behind open source is that you should be able to take your IT person that maybe isn't necessarily an expert in open source or in Odoo or ERP Next, but that could learn it and quickly apply those technical skills to be able to change or tweak the software wherever you need to. But to the extent you need outside resources, Odoo doesn't have that, quite the breadth that a lot of vendors do already. And I imagine that'll change in 5 or 10 years or whatever. It might be a moot point, but right now, that's something to consider for sure.
Sure. So what are some other considerations that if I'm an organization, small to mid-size, thinking that this might be a really great flexible option, what are some of the main considerations that organizations should just be aware of when thinking about an open source system like Odoo?
Yeah, so one thing I'd say that I also say this in past episodes and other videos we put out on YouTube, but I've mentioned this about Microsoft Dynamics in particular. Not Microsoft Dynamics, to be clear, is not an open source system, but it's a relatively more flexible system than, say, an SAP S/4HANA or an Oracle NetSuite. Generally, Dynamics is a more flexible version, and the Odoo is an even more extreme example of flexibility. And it sounds good in theory, but there is a definite dark side to that flexibility in that, a lot of times the value that people in organizations want to get out of their enterprise technology is to drive efficiency, to drive a standard operating model across your organization, to, get everyone operating the same way. And just because you can be flexible with your technology doesn't necessarily mean you should. I mean, you could be using flexibility as an excuse to not make the changes you might need to make, or that maybe you could be making to be more efficient or more effective as an organization. So I think it's a matter of just really understanding where you want to be on that pendulum or on that continuum of flexibility versus rigid standardization. Most companies are somewhere in the middle, but you want to figure out where on that continuum you want to be. And if you go with an Odoo or an open source, you just want to be aware that you can create a lot of problems by being that flexible. You can try and get the software to do things it wasn't built to do, and it just can create complications during implementation, and it can actually mask some of the change resistance or change management issues that an organization might be facing.
Right, and that was my next question. So excellent segue there. Is how does an open source system affect your change plan? Obviously, you want to be cognizant of that, but it seems like it might be a bit harder to predict like how roles will change with that that heightened level of flexibility.
Yeah, you have it's difficult because you have an automatic eject button, if you will, from making a change. So like you take like an S4HANA, for example, whether you like it or not, S4HANA works a certain way. And yes, it has some flexibility. I don't want to make it sound like there's only one way it works, but you're sort of limited by how much you can change the software. And I'm not going to argue whether that's good or bad necessarily, but there's something to be said for the fact that you're sort of forcing the organization to fit into the software, which is painful in its own way. That creates a whole host of other issues, but it does create that you don't have a choice. I mean, you have to change and you have to become more like the software versus the way you are today. With something like an Odoo or an open source system, you have a really good excuse not to change. You can say, well, we can just modify the source code to do the way we've always done things. And that's not necessarily the right answer. It might be in some cases, but other cases it could just be hiding, or a refusal to change or a missed opportunity to improve your business in a meaningful way. So I think that's probably the biggest one, is just understanding and recognizing the dark side of flexibility. And then the other thing we already mentioned, which is that technical upkeep and just understanding the architecture and the back end and what it's going to take to maintain that if you do end up making changes to the software going forward.
Yeah, definitely. I think that piece in just understanding what that looks like via any sort of support system is so important, whether it's an independent consultant in these situations, so that you really are optimizing the technology that you're implementing. What I think is really interesting about Odoo is about 90% of Odoo's customer base takes the free tier, so their free tier of technology modules, and only 10% takes the paid or the proprietary tier. They have about 7 million users, so that still is a strong profit margin. But I'm wondering, I don't know that I've ever heard of an ERP system operating that way, offering complementary functions and using sort of that upgrade type subscription model. And I wondered if you could kind of take us through what that looks like as far as budgeting around utilizing systems that might be structured like that.
Yeah, it's sort of that freemium model that a lot of consumer technologies do, where you get a free trial or you get the cheap free version, but if you want certain functionality, you have to pay for it. And it's sort of a way just to ease you into the platform, and then eventually the hope is that a subset of people will pay to use the more premium features. And that's a lot like what open source or what Odoo's pricing model is doing, is it's trying to get you on the platform, get you comfortable with it, get your hands dirty using the product, and then eventually, upselling you to the paid version. It is a good way to try it and learn it and see if it could be a good fit for your organization. I will say though that it's a lot of effort. I mean, it's one thing to have a developer or one of your people just go in and mess around with it and see how it works. That's a lot of effort to go set it up and to really try it out. But if you're going to try it on a broader scale, that's even more effort. If you're going to get the organization to try and learn it, and then what if you find out you don't like it, or you don't get the capabilities you want, you don't want to pay for it? I mean, there's a lot of unknowns. So I think you just have to be careful. You're not just haphazardly heading down this path without having a pretty clear confidence that, this is probably the right solution for us. So let's test it out with a pilot or whatever on the free version, and then we can kind of expand it from there. I wouldn't recommend that if you're just thinking about it, you just go try it and start getting people to use it, because then it may or may not be a good fit. And if it's not a good fit, it's going to be hard to go change back to something else or to go back to your old way of doing things if that's the way you decide to go.
Yeah, definitely. So speaking of pricing structure, how does an open source system like Odoo kind of compare from an overall investment standpoint to other ERP systems for small to mid-sized businesses?
Yeah, so the open source sales message is a lot like what other ERP vendors will tell you, like what cloud providers will tell you, for example, that their product is cheaper, it's faster to implement, it's easier. They're going to tell you all that same stuff that other vendors would say. So they're going to say, because we have this free model and the pricing for licenses or subscriptions is lower, which is true, but when you look at the grand scheme of things of what it really costs to deploy an enterprise-wide technology, it's usually not the technology itself that's the biggest price tag line item. Usually it's all the process improvement, the time it takes to do that, the change management, the data migration, the integration to other systems, the architecture, all that other stuff ends up, you're not really changing that cost profile overall, but on the direct software side, yes, you might be getting a slightly better deal. But I will say too that we always tell clients that if you see a big delta between two vendors in terms of their cost that they're asking on their subscription and their licenses, then chances are you could probably negotiate away most of that difference, if not all of it, because vendors have a high profit margin to begin with, and they have a lot of room to move. So I wouldn't put too much stock in that, to be honest. Other than the free version, you're not going to get SAP or Oracle or any of those guys to give you any meaningful free access to their software. So short of a free model, if you're paying for it, chances are you can probably negotiate something similar with other vendors out there. That's a broad generalization, of course, but I wouldn't let that rule out other options if there are other options that are non-open source that might be better fits for you.
Yeah, no, that's definitely good information to know. So as we move into kind of this disruptor phase that Odoo's bringing as far as open source, and obviously it's attractive to PE different clients and firms, is open source the next step for ERP? Is that where a lot of the companies will go if they want to be more innovative? Or do you think they kind of just have the ownership of this specific market?
I think it's just another innovative option in the market. I don't necessarily think everyone's going to go that direction. In fact, I don't know. This is just speculation. I'm not a software vendor, so I can't speak for them. But if I were a software vendor like an SAP or an Oracle, I wouldn't want this movement to catch too much traction because it disrupts my model. So I'm probably going to work pretty hard to provide a counterpoint or an option that's very different from that, but adds some sort of meaningful value that people are willing to pay for. So I just think it's kind of like the best of breed option. You've got constant innovation within CRM systems and human capital systems and financials and ERP. There's all these different options out there. Open source is just one other option. You have cloud's an option, on-premise is an option. You have all these different models. I don't know that I would see, like right now, most vendors are moving toward cloud. I don't know if you're going to see a similar movement in several years or decades where everyone's sort of moving to this open source. I don't know. I couldn't tell you, but I don't see that happening. But I've been wrong before. It could happen.
Yeah, well, it seems as though at least Odoo has a bright future, and big congratulations for capturing this types of funding. And if Fabian, their CEO, wants to come in and teach us more about open source, we'd love to hear it. But speaking of CEOs, it's a talk of the CEOs today. You spoke to Wayne, another CEO, for our conversation today, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And Wayne's a really interesting guy, entrepreneur at heart, and he has quite a background as a private equity type person that's done a lot of investments in high growth companies. And he has his own company now called Ninja Nation. We're going to talk a little bit about what Ninja Nation does, but it's a high growth company that's growing very quickly through a franchise model, which I always find that fascinating because I feel like that's sort of the utopia of entrepreneurship, is creating a business model that spreads like wildfire through franchising. It's such a great way to grow a company, and it's also a good way to learn. You can always learn from franchisors, I believe, in terms of how to scale a company, because that's what they do. They have to master that art of scaling quickly and opening up new locations quickly. So that's really why I wanted to have him on the show. And he's a close personal friend of ours too. He's a family friend. Our kids go to the same school. We live, relatively close to one another. We work out together occasionally. So we have same trainer. So there's a lot of personal connections as well. But in addition to that, obviously the business side is what we want to cover here in a moment. So we're going to have Wayne Cavanaugh, who's the CEO and founder of Ninja Nation. He's going to be on here after we take a quick break. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control. We'll be right back.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology-agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstage-consulting.com.
Welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. You can find us with new episodes every Wednesday on YouTube and all the audio podcast platforms. And this week, we're excited to have on the show Wayne Cavanaugh, who's the CEO and founder of a company called Ninja Nation. We want to talk about scaling companies in this discussion, not only in the context of him being an entrepreneur of a franchisor that's growing through franchising, but also as a previous private equity kind of guy that has worked with a lot of mid-size, high-growth organizations and investing in those organizations to fuel their growth. So really want to focus on scale. What does it take to scale operationally from a people perspective and also from a technology perspective? So all that being said, Wayne, thanks for being on the show today.
Hey, Eric. Happy to be here.
All right, cool. So Wayne, you and I are first of all, we'll just get it out on the table. We're family friends. We're close friends. Our families are friends, and we've known each other on a personal level for some time now. But it turns out you have a very interesting background that is, in my opinion, very related to what I do and complementary to what I do. So maybe talk a little bit about just your background and what you do here at Ninja Nation, and maybe a little bit about your past upbringing as well.
Yeah, happy to do it. And thanks for having me on, Eric. I'm really excited to do this. So this is a blast for me. I could talk about Ninja Nation for hours on end. So I'll try to keep the comments short and sweet. But just from a background perspective, grew up in Chicago, started my career in Chicago in investment banking in Chicago and London. Spent a lot of my time in mergers and acquisitions, capital raises, IPOs, secondary offerings. Great experience in investment banking. Moved into private equity for about 10 years with a stop at business school, kind of halfway through there. And a lot of that time was spent on high growth health and wellness companies. So if you think about physical therapy, dialysis companies in particular, smaller companies that had created a really cool patient experience, but their growth was all around multi-site scale. So they went from having 5, 6, 7, 8 locations to one of those companies now has about 1,000 locations across the country. So really enjoyed doing that. Moved out of private equity to go into operations. I really enjoyed the operations side of growing the companies, and not as much the capital side, and moved into helping companies scale and grow from an executive level perspective. And did that for a number of years until in 2017, I founded my own company, which is Ninja Nation. And today, Ninja Nation is the leading provider of marquee ninja sport experiences. If you're familiar with American Ninja Warrior, the television show, that really kicked off and started this amazing sport of ninja. So Ninja Nation caters to primarily youth and families looking for an amazing jungle gym on steroids is what we call it. It's a ANW-like experience in terms of maybe some of the obstacles you would see on a television show that they've made famous. But we provide it in about 15,000 square feet, just beautifully appointed, awesome, safe facilities. And in those facilities, we provide everything from a development program, so classes and competitions, to birthday parties. We claim they're the best birthday parties on the planet. We host field trips. We hold adult team building functions in our facilities. And every week we have about 1,000 participants per location roll through our doors. So business that I really founded out of a passion for youth athletics and the positive experience that you can have on today's youth through a really mind-blowing athletic experience for them where they're working out, but they're having so much fun, they don't know they're working out. So today we're at 5 operating locations. We started a franchising program that really re-kicked off about 2 months ago. And we've had, I think we're up to 500 to 600 applicants for Ninja Nation franchise locations across the world. We're focused exclusively on the United States right now, but the plan is to move international in the next several years as well.
Great. That's awesome. So what's interesting about your business with Ninja Nation is that, a lot of this growth that you've experienced was during the pandemic, during a time which would seem like the worst time to be in that business. So how did you guys maybe tell us a little bit about how you navigated that and what that growth trajectory looked like, over the last year and a half since the pandemic?
Yes. February 2020, we were at peak performance. We had about 15 folks about to sign in our franchise process for new locations. And by March 15th, we had turned off the lights, locked the doors, turned off the lights, and moved into just along with the rest of the world into kind of hunkering down and working through it. We spent that time, one, assessing what COVID impact would be for our business, for how long, what services we could continue to offer. And so by June 1, we were reopened and we offered up a single skill ninja camp, which is really kind of ninja care, with a drop-off program, health screening. Parents would just drop off outside, kids would come in, spend the day at Ninja Nation. We had a really cool camp programming that existed. We modified it for this care program. And within 2 weeks, we had sold out the entire summer. So the one aspect of COVID at that time, and I think it continues to be the case, is it didn't impact kids from a health perspective nearly as much. So whether they're asymptomatic or our health screening really worked, we had 1,300 to 1,400 kids come through in a 2-month period last summer, and not a single reported case of COVID. Wow. So that was really well done. Our team executed it really well, and it was something that the communities really needed at that time. And then since then, we've seen things explode. So our class program and participation is through the roof. Our mobile offering, which is events that we do at churches, schools, in the communities, have come back largely. Now we'll figure out what this next surge does to all of that. But as you know, especially in your world, it's all about pivoting. And so the team focuses on pivoting. It's not, you can't put your head in the sand, right? You got to just get out there, roll up your sleeves and figure it out.
Yeah. And it's a interesting story because I remember you and I talking just on a personal basis around that time. And it was a scary time for all of us, especially those of us that own businesses, and yours in particular seemed like, could be at risk, but you guys found a way to navigate that sort of pivot, change the business model. And is that when you started getting into more, you started pushing to the franchising, or the franchising really took off was post-COVID, or had you already been doing that?
Yeah. So we had started it maybe 2 months pre-COVID. So beginning of 2020. And we quickly put it by the wayside. I mean, our focus was taking care of our employees, helping our team members through this crazy COVID world, focus on the participants and consumers we had at the time and what services we could offer. And, for us, franchising is building partnerships, right? It's finding terrific people that are passionate about what we do. We want to be able to showcase that. have operations that make sense, prove to ourselves that our team could pivot the way we needed to pivot, and then bring in those partners at that time when our heads were clear, because it's a two-way street and it's a permanent relationship. And so we need to have clear heads, kind of clear operational, pathway through COVID. And then once we got that done, we turned the franchise engine back on.
Nice. So in addition to COVID, what other challenges have you faced, or what have some of the biggest challenges been that you faced while scaling up and growing Ninja Nation?
We've been very fortunate in a number of areas. The market level of interest in what we do was probably the biggest challenge early on. When I remember walking into the first set of meetings with landlords that were renting out spaces, and I said, I want to do this ninja sport concept and build it, and they, you almost get laughed out of the room. And so the same thing with parents, right? So the great part about the systems we created at Ninja Nation, the service offerings we have really introduce parents and kids through birthday parties. So if you think about Colton having a birthday party, they invite 14 friends that may have never heard of the sport of ninja. They have a mind-blowing experience. It's super fun. They have a great birthday party, but then they find out, hey, you do classes and you do competitions, and there's a community around this, and there's ninja moms and ninja dads and people that are really into this, and you can make this your sport. And so I would say that we call it driving access to the sport and awareness of the sport. And being a leader in that has been a blast, because you see a lot of eye-opening experiences. You see kids' lives being changed, their confidence grow, moms and dads happy because their kids are getting a great workout. They're away from TV screens, they're away from their iPhones, and the kids don't realize they're getting a workout. They're just having fun. So I think generating an understanding that there's nothing wrong with trampoline parks. They're a great place to go have fun. But people mentally want to categorize you into some category. Are you a gymnastics facility? Are you a trampoline park? Right? One is entertainment. Gymnastics is a sport. So we created this new segment we called Sportainment. And it's this combination of sport and entertainment. We're doing a development program alongside doing birthday parties. We're doing field trips alongside doing our Ninja Nation basics class. We'll have competitions. At the same time, you can come have a end of season celebratory party for your soccer team.
Right, that's very cool. Okay, we're here talking to Wayne Cavanaugh about scaling and growth for small and mid-sized organizations. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we have more questions for Wayne. We'll be right back on more Transformation Ground Control.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you will want to download the 2021 Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us, or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how to take your transformation to the third stage of success.
Welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. I'm here with Wayne Cavanaugh having a great conversation about scaling small and mid-sized organizations from a people, process, and technology perspective. Let's jump right back into the conversation. When you think about the scaling challenges you face now with a small business that's growing quickly, how does that compare, or sort of what experience do you bring to the table from your past experience with a PE company? You talked about some of the organizations you were involved with in the health industry and others, but what are some of the lessons from maybe that past life of yours as far as some of the biggest challenges you've seen, just maybe organizations in general across the board that you've worked with? What are some of those biggest challenges you've seen?
Yeah, the benefit of having the experience that I've had, when you in private equity, you buy these companies and your job is to help them grow. And helping companies grow can mean a lot of different things. I always think about it as scaling the business, and how do you replicate that secret sauce that has made the existing components of the business successful, given that you've got constraints. There's always constraints around time, people, cash, capital, kind of any other unique resources there may be for that particular business. And when you buy them, you grow them, and then you ultimately exit them and you sell them. And hopefully you've done your job of creating not only a scaled business from where you start, but you've created a scalable engine that has this perpetual motion behind it that can keep going well beyond your period of ownership. So I always call it writing the playbook of, when you buy a company today, you've got to think 5 years ahead as to what that perpetual energy machine looks like from scalability 5 years before you get to that point. Because without that roadmap and without that kind of, it's almost like how do I want to present the business? I pretend I'm in a room with some people and they say, here's what we've done. Here's why it's not just a one-trick pony, why I can keep doing that. So that was my job for the bulk of my early career. When I created Ninja Nation, those habits that you develop professionally, you apply in all sorts of different settings. I applied it in the Ninja Nation setting. So it was the same kind of thing. Not that I'm looking to sell Ninja Nation, but when I look at that perpetual energy machine, what do I need to put in place today to actually have that happen and not be a one-trick pony? Meaning, for us, a single facility. I don't want to be a single facility operator. I want to prove that I can have this scalable component to our business. That meant investing ahead of the curve. And that's one of my founding investor partners talked about quite a bit. When you invest ahead of the curve, systems in particular are really where you do that. What does that mean? For us, systems were how the consumer interacts with our business, right? So we went out and we got the same system platform that Orange Theory Fitness uses. They use it for thousands of locations, hundreds or thousands of locations. And we were looking at using it for a single one. Why did we do that? We needed to be able to kind of have that vision of scale. We use Ring Central for our platforms. We use a third-party software platform for payroll. So telephony, billing, IT, and then our core consumer interaction platform from booking classes, birthday parties, all fully integrated system for purposes of scale. And scale has another component behind it, more than just replicability, which is information, right? So we use it for data purposes. All of our waivers are digital. Why is that? Because we use that for marketing information. Moms and dads put in their email addresses and we can remarket future services to them, reminders about their child's birthday coming up, so we can book birthday parties. We can keep track of how many heroes we've created, right? So our number one metric we track are the number of participants, unique participants we've had come through our doors, which we've almost hit 200,000 in the last 3 years. And so we do all that so that we've got data, and we can turn that data into information, and we can use it to track the performance of the business, our promotional activities, what kind of results we get from that. We use it for remarketing purposes, consumer engagement. All those things are things that businesses of our size would never have. I mean, emerging brands like ours, we're so far ahead from a technology perspective that allows us to really scale in a really positive way and then hand that to our franchisees. They're on the same platforms that we're on, allows them to run their business effectively, highly efficiently. And it's a really important component of what we do.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know if you and I don't think we've talked about this before, but have you ever read that book, E-Myth Remastered?
I
Have you heard
haven't.
of that?
I,
So go ahead.
no, go ahead.
I was going to say it's a book about growing a business and how you need the way to scale is to think about your business like a franchise. And so, it sounds like that's sort of what you did from day one is even before you were actually franchising, you're thinking about how do I get systems and repeatable processes in place to where you could bring in, 3, 5, 10, 20, however many franchises, and you've got a playbook, you've got a system to do it. So it sounds like it's a basic no brainer, but I think a lot of organizations forget that. They think, they rely on tribal knowledge. They've got heroics, like individual heroics that are driving the business, and that's not scalable. You've got processes that are just sort of intuitively known by people, but they're not documented. So it's all the stuff that sort of runs counter to what you're saying. And what I love about your business model is you're totally dependent on being able to scale. I mean, you can't franchise unless you have repeatable processes and systems and that sort of thing. So it's pretty interesting. I think a lot of what you just said applies. You don't need to be a franchisor to do that sort of thing or to benefit from that sort of thinking.
That's and I have listened to the audio book version of that book. And I think in that particular example that they had, the gentleman was running his business and he was literally holding everything together. I mean, he was doing everything, right? And to your point, you've got to be able to extract that stuff from your brain, somehow document it, and then empower others to go do it. But you've got to have the ability to trust but verify. And that's exactly how I built this business, so that I could have phenomenal people, better than me, at running the front desk at Ninja Nation, but have the systems behind it all. So I had visibility into how they were performing, what unique needs they may have that I don't recognize, resources I could get them so that they can perform in their roles better. And so from day one, I built it so that I could live a franchisee's life of not having to be in the facility every single day, but have enough visibility into this, really cool operation via a systems platform, a technology and information platform.
Yeah. Yeah. So you talk about the systems, and those are good examples of the billing and the customer engagement, document management for waivers and things like that. You talked about some of the specific technologies or types of technologies that are critical to you being able to scale and add new locations. What about from a pure process improvement or process optimization perspective? And I guess maybe I'll ask it from two different angles. One is for Ninja Nation in particular. How have you viewed that whole, or how have you addressed that whole concept of process optimization and continuous improvement? And then I'll also ask you, as it relates to private equity and maybe some of the larger firms you've worked with over the years, how, if it's different. But maybe starting with Ninja Nation, how do you treat business processes? How do you manage that longer term?
So being so consumer facing, we trust consumer opinion to drive our optimization. There are some unique challenges to consumer opinions in our particular business. A lot of that data that we extract and contact information we extract, and we do two things from process improvement. We do real-time text surveys 24 hours after your visit to Ninja Nation. So your mom or dad will get a text. How was your visit to Ninja Nation? It's a rating system. We get immediate feedback. And then we have the ability to follow up and ask for more details if there was a challenged experience at Ninja Nation. Secondly, we do very formal surveys. And so we probably have done 70 plus consumer surveys using our database on particular topics, whether it's class scheduling, programming, competitions, birthday party experience, because we view process improvement as a daily thing, right? We're driven by consumers, and we try to incorporate that feedback on a real-time basis. we use information from our systems to tell us how we're performing in certain categories, whether that's class attendance, type of class attendance. We have an introductory class. There's certain metrics we track every single week to understand how the sales of our particular services are performing and correlated to the survey feedback we're getting. And so we'll continually try out and test and pilot new service offerings based on what we're hearing from our consumers. The only danger we have is people that are very passionate about Ninja Nation. They're Ninja moms and dads, and they're there all the time. We're trying to help their children become the best athlete they can be. And at the same time, we're bringing in new athletes, which means challenges and the level of difficulty of our obstacles is always something that we're trying to balance, because you've got kids that very quickly accelerate in their fitness path, and then others that are just coming in. So we've got to, continually protect the experience, making it a great experience for beginners as well as, advanced kids at the same time. And then we have a very empowered leadership team. We have a value system and we have a mission, right? Our mission is to create 1 million heroes. Our value system is based on our 3 E's: engagement, encouragement, and energy. We teach our franchisees the same kind of value system. And the reason that's important is, as long as you're doing and taking actions that fall into the buckets of enhancing engagement, driving energy, focusing on encouragement, and any one of those things, when you're feeding into it from a process improvement perspective, you have full permission to go do it. So there's little limitations we put on driving outstanding consumer experiences, as long as you're following that value system.
That's super interesting, and you're touching on what I'd consider sort of the secret sauce of scalability, which is creating that culture and the values and just the overall environment. That's you can't really necessarily document that as a playbook, although you kind of have with your 3 E's and some of the things that you value. But I mean, as far as everything from your hiring practices to the way you groom and develop people, you've probably systematized a lot of that. But that's sort of creating that culture. That's when you combine that with the technology and the process stuff that you talked about, that right there is that really powerful combination that I would imagine could fuel a lot of scalability or growth beyond what the average company could.
It really is. It's actually the key component to our success is the right people doing the right job at the right time. And we focus on behavioral profiles, personality testing for every new hire. They go through a personality profile. If they don't get an 8 out of 10 or better on matching the desired personality for that particular role, we don't hire them. So we're very behavioral. I call it employee dissonance. It's a person that's in a role that they have to exhibit behaviors that are forced, and it will drive them to quit or be a bad apple in the bunch. When they're doing something like, if you're introverted and you're asked to be an extrovert 90% of your job, you won't last. It won't work. You won't find satisfaction. So we try to bring people into the workplace in their natural state, exhibiting those same natural personality attributes that they have. And we test for that. And then to your point about development, the biggest, I would say, outsized investment we made relative to the size of the company was we have an online learning platform. We white labeled a third party's training platform, created Ninja Nation University. So now we're hiring in based off of personality profiles, and then we're doing explicit training on exactly what your role is, what are the 3 E's, how do you exhibit those in your role, what are the don'ts, how you don't exhibit that, because a lot of the folks we hire in are younger people. This may be their first job, And what we want it to be is, and we know that they will move on at some point, right? A lot of those folks will go to college, they'll go, go into the workplace well beyond Ninja Nation. But we want to give them a great foundational understanding of what a great work environment looks like, cross-training experiences. What does it mean to be an outstanding customer service employee, right? How do you drive phenomenal consumer experience so that when they do graduate from college, ideally, just from a personal satisfaction and having an impact on folks, I want those future employers to see Ninja Nation on a resume and say, wow, you were selected by a phenomenal company. You were trained exceptionally well. You showed that you could be successful in that environment and have it be a real kind of gold star on your resume if you worked at Ninja Nation.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, it's a great way to look at it. I mean, everything from the learning platform to the way you view new hires and the way you develop them and treat them. I mean, I think that's it's one of those things that doesn't sound like rocket science. It's not rocket science, but so many organizations and leaders lose sight of that or forget to do that stuff or don't think to do that stuff as part of their day-to-day jobs.
And that's a benefit of the background that I have, and I'd be failing my company if I didn't put all that to use. But I'd also be lying to say I haven't made a ton of mistakes over 20 years of being involved in 15 different companies, or seen shortcomings of companies that wanted to scale but were wondering why they struggled to do that. The components of scale, applying people, process, technology to accomplish scale is not just a one-time process. It's continual. And we get caught up in financial performance, and one of those people, process, or technology things falls by the wayside, and you're wondering why you can't scale, and you almost have to go back to the drawing board, revisit those three things again. And just like that book that we were talking about, The Goal, the stopping and starting of that costs you a lot of time and energy and other resources. Whereas if you can keep it as a continual review process and part of what you do, you really minimize that feeling of catching up and all those wasted resources that go into that. And that takes having made a lot of mistakes in the past of forgetting about those things, and then just ingraining that in how your team approaches things on a routine basis, so that it's a highly efficient company that's able to pivot. Like we were talking about with COVID, you're able to pivot quickly, move forward, and not be, constantly caught on your heels.
Yeah. Okay, we're here talking to Wayne Cavanaugh about scaling and growth for small and mid-sized organizations. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we have more questions for Wayne. We'll be right back on more Transformation Ground Control.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstage-consulting.com.
Welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. I'm here with Wayne Cavanaugh having a great conversation about scaling small and mid-sized organizations from a people, process, and technology perspective. Let's jump right back into the conversation. So let's go with that thread for a second. I mean, if you back up in your career or rewind back to the earlier years of your career as a PE guy, and now you have the luxury, I guess, of being able to take all those lessons, apply it to Ninja Nation, and you understand people, process, technology, so you can get it maybe not perfect, but you can get it right, do a lot of the things that maybe you wouldn't have done 20 years ago when you first started. But if you rewind and go back, you've worked with a lot of companies where you're going in, you're taking an equity stake or maybe a majority stake in the company. And yep, there's probably some sort of underlying value in the company, but there's also probably something wrong or holding it back. So I suspect you've probably had to do a bit of turnaround or, sort of getting those people, process, technology components right. So first of all, is that a safe assumption? Is that true? Like, would you typically go in and find that it's a valuable company, but it's undervalued because they're not getting the secret sauce right, or there's some opportunity they're missing out on? Is that typically what you would invest in?
Yeah, it runs the gamut. And I wasn't a turnaround specialist. I became one in 2009 because of the 2008 financial crisis. So I would say we very quickly had to learn how to be a turnaround specialist, not out of desire or purpose going into it. And I would say, a lot of times companies can lose track of what's core to their success. And you start building layers and layers of other stuff that goes into the business that moves you farther away from having that core value proposition exposed and kind of front and center for everything that you do. So people start to move away into other areas, and that creates a lot of that excess cost when you're trying out other things, or you're trying to move into a new segment of the market because it looks shiny and flashy and you think you can attain growth from there. A lot of times what I found is simple is better, and keeping your business really focused on that core thing that you do that creates great consumer relationship, whatever your customers are, or clients. Just doing that over and over again, and saying no when these distractions come in. And it's hard to do when you're private equity backed. You're meeting with the board on a quarterly basis, but your private equity relationships are daily, right? So you're talking to someone, the PE firm, maybe on a daily basis, and you feel this obligation to kind of, hey, we're creating, we're doing something new. We've got this piece going, this other thing. Yeah, we're growing 5 to 8% in our core of what we do, but private equity guys, you want to go kill it for them. So you want to, where can we go get 1,000% growth? And you move away from that core thing. So if there's any theme that I really embedded in what we do at Ninja Nation, it's simplicity. So when you go into our arenas, we don't have fryers. We don't make food. We don't have pizza ovens. We don't have soda machines. There's two reasons behind that. One, there's no bad job in Ninja Nation, meaning someone's got a hairnet on and they're stuck behind a fryer all day at 800 degrees. But more importantly, everybody's consumer facing, because our core is making a phenomenal experience for moms and dads and their kids. And everything that we add in, while we can make extra money with pizza ovens, right? We can make our own pizzas instead of bringing them in. We could have soda machines. We could have video game machines in the lobby. All those things may add a layer of profitability in their own right that are going to move us farther away from being that consumer engaged positive experience by distracting us to go do those other things. Let's just do what we do really well and not allow for distractions away from that.
Yeah. It's a good point. So is that whole theme of simplicity and sticking to your core, sticking to your knitting, whatever you want to call it, is that something that you found in your PE life back in the day was something you had to sort of strip out some of the complexities or strip out some of the distractions within the investments that you guys would make?
And that's where there's a high level of thought put into what is that core value proposition, so that you can identify all these extraneous layers of other stuff that have been added in and then strip it away. So we've had to do that, in 2009 in particular, where you had to really dig in and kind of say, hey, there's a smart way to go do cost reductions. And then there's the shotgun approach, right? Just people need to go, these costs need to go, and it positions the company poorly for the rebound or when you're coming out of that, because you will have hurt part of the core value proposition. So the thing that a guy named Mark King always kind of taught me is how are we putting the consumer first? How are we communicating to our teams what our value proposition is to clients and demonstrating that we really understand how we drive value in that client's life or that consumer's life, and then work backwards from there and make sure that everything in the organization is aligned around that. And once you start to think about things that way, it seems to make your life a bit easier. And one of the things that we really focus on is communicating that to our team, to your employees. It demonstrates that you know the consumer. It demonstrates to your team that you help them find an identity around why they exist or why they're in this role, why they're an employee with the company. And that's a higher level of intentional thought that has to be put into that. And without that, we've found companies, I mean, I've looked at 2,000 companies would be my guess during my investment banking and private equity days. And you're always looking for signs that the company actually understands its key value proposition. And that's demonstrated through where they're spending money, how they're spending money, what kind of, returns they're getting on the investment initiatives that they take, but more importantly, the dialogue with the management teams, right? You that's why you have those meetings. You get to meet those folks, is you really need to understand, do they really understand what purpose their business serves to the world? And are they talking in a way that shows that the partnership they want to be in with you is aligned around, driving that value? That makes it, it sounds simple, and some people don't like to sound simple. They want to make it sound more complicated than it really needs to be. But the simpler they can make it sound, to me, the more intelligent they are, and that they've actually understood that layers of complexity and extra activities in the business that move away from that core value proposition. It shows this higher level of thought and a stronger likelihood for sustained success.
Okay, we're here talking to Wayne Cavanaugh about scaling and growth for small and mid-sized organizations. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we have more questions for Wayne. We'll be right back on more Transformation Ground Control.
I'm all right today. You don't find...
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you will want to download the 2021 Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how to take your transformation to the third stage of success.
Welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. I'm here with Wayne Cavanaugh having a great conversation about scaling small and mid-sized organizations from a people, process, and technology perspective. Let's jump right back into the conversation. If you think about, sort of your private equity days over here, Ninja Nation over here. Ninja Nation, let's call that the model of simplicity and scalability, repeatability, all that stuff that, you've been learning over the last 20 years. But over here in your private equity days, when you would get involved with one of these companies that didn't have the Ninja Nation mindset or whatever whatever you want to call it, what were some of the other things, in addition to focus and simplicity, what were some of the other challenges or pains that you saw those companies go through as they tried to get to that level of scale and growth?
I was very fortunate to be part of two companies in particular that were phenomenal results from scaling initiatives. And the reason they were successful is the opposite of why others aren't. One is investing ahead of the curve, right? So understanding where you need to be 5 years from now and convincing capital resources around you to make those investments. Two, it had a lot to do with employees, understanding your culture, having your own university to teach your culture to people coming in, to teach the desired behaviors. Training is a lot more for scale, is very different than training for operational efficiency. Meaning, I could teach you how to work the front desk at an Engination, and you would be able to do it. You could book a birthday party, you could check people in when they come in, you can help a field trip, get all the kids lined up and going. But I'm trying to teach you the culture and the why behind why we exist, why I need you to do it with a smile, why I need you to do it in a bubbly manner. Those are the things that are key differentiators, because once I help you understand why, you're able to perform better because you have purpose behind why you're doing it, but you're also able to help me improve it. Meaning, if you understand why you need to behave a certain way in these roles, you understand that you're trying to create some sort of experience. That empowers you to think about other ways to enhance that experience, in my view. And as long as you're coming to me with suggestions that fit with that why, then you're able to go have a lot of autonomy, have more fun in your role, and it helps the company be more successful. That is, I don't want to say stolen, but replicated from the companies that I saw do that incredibly well. And once you start putting all those things together, the biggest constraint almost all organizations have, sometimes it's systems, right, and access to information. And when you have lack of systems and information, you can't communicate results. A lot of attracting in capital, which ultimately is the governor of all growth, is not being able to demonstrate success. And the way you demonstrate success in today's world is through saying we're going to go do something, we measured it, and we met or exceeded the initial expectations. Without proper systems to do that, for example, if we didn't have the ability to track attendance by service line and type that we have in Engination, and I'm sitting here talking to franchisees about seasonal promotions or the seasonality in the business, and I don't have any data to back up what I'm talking about or information to communicate my understanding of the business and how we grow, I can't be a great partner to a franchisees. Same thing when it comes to communicating with my investors, right? We put together a budget or a forecast or expected set of goals, and then we measure towards that. And those systems, in my view, are highly critical to attracting in future capital, because I can demonstrate that I did what I said I was going to do. My team accomplished what we said we were going to accomplish. And that's why I'm such a big believer in investing ahead of the curve, is those systems that we invested in will actually help me grow significantly more and in a way that I wouldn't have been able to without having them.
Yeah. It's sort of like you need to address all those areas. It's almost a recipe for scale. It's not just doing any one of those things, but you miss any one of them, you're gonna miss out on that potential growth trajectory that you've seen with some of these companies.
And it's the hardest thing about being an entrepreneur is you start with a blank sheet of paper and limited resources. And it is, I should write a book at some point about just trying to help people with their startups. There's a lot of missteps in there. You need to focus, number one, on making your first dollar revenue, and revenue cures all ills. But there's strategic thought that you can put into a timeline of events that you want to happen. That and systems, to me, being top 3 biggest investments that we made at Ninja to get us where we are today. And that takes guts to start putting money into systems that are well beyond what you need today, with a vision that those systems are going to be highly critical, not only to the growth of the business, but your ability to attract in capital down the road.
Yeah, we see a lot of companies that have done the opposite. A lot of our clients, for example, have done the opposite. They've grown, they've scaled, they've underinvested in technology. And there's a term that is commonly used in our space called technology debt. So in other words, you're behind on technology. So now you've got this debt that you've got to sort of pay off or catch just to catch up. And I think a lot of companies struggle to get ahead of the curve. And then what they do is they try to make such a massive leap. They go from technical debt to implementing a cloud-based, enterprise technology with artificial intelligence and all this cool stuff. But it ends up being such a massive disruption because now you're trying to cram this all into a short period of change. And so it's interesting to hear you say that, even as a startup, back when you had, really no employees, or you're just getting started, you were still investing, 5 years out. And a lot of companies don't think that way. They wait until the system's about to break, or it already did break, and now I've got to replace it and get caught up with,
right.
The 2020s where we're at today.
Right.
So it's
and that's the communication battle. You're sitting in a board meeting, maybe you're behind on results, and then at the same time you say, hey, I want to invest in technology that's 5 years ahead on a continual basis. It takes a lot of guts. It takes a high performing board to understand that. The strategy behind continually investing in people, process, and technology it's easy to say, but in the face of adversity, those things start to very quickly go by the wayside if you're not as strong in the spine about sticking to those things and continually making investments in there for the future success of the company. And that's where companies go wrong. They let one of those things go. We're going to stop with our phenomenal HR process, and we're going to let that go by the wayside. We're going to not move into the next version of whatever software helps us perform better. We're not going to launch a CRM like we said we would, or whatever have you. It takes a lot of factors, but it takes a lot of guts to continually put your foot down and say, hey, we're going to keep making these investments for the long run.
Yeah. Makes sense. And I guess that's, maybe a good way to sort of tie this all together and wrap up the conversation is, you're hitting on a really important topic of leadership. And having a spine and being able to make those gutsy decisions, or set that gutsy vision for, how things could be different from where they are today. But what advice would you give to an organization? Let's assume that most people listening to this conversation are in established businesses of some sort, and they probably aren't perfect. They probably have opportunities for improvement. And if they're listening to this, or they follow me on social media, they're probably going through some sort of transformation of their own as a business. What words of wisdom would you give for a company that's just trying to change and maybe correct or right size their ability to scale? They're not a startup. They've been around for however long. Maybe it's a family owned 3rd generation business, been around for 50 years, whatever the case may be. And they're trying to figure out how do we get to the next level? We're stuck. We didn't do a lot of the things that Ninja did from day one. We probably should have, but it's too late now. So what do we do to fix that? I mean, what advice would you give as sort of the highest low hanging fruit for a company or a team or an individual within a team that wants to lead the charge for some sort of transformation to be able to scale?
I really was, as simple as it sounds, the understanding why, right? That's Simon's book that he wrote about understanding your why. To me, it's of critical importance, because when you're going through change, one, if you're the leader of that change, you have to understand the why. Why are we doing what we're doing? Why are we doing it now? Why are we doing it in this particular way? Why are we doing it with this system? And then you have to live that. You have to own that, live that. Most importantly, though, you have to find the right channels of communication around that, right? So whether you're communicating up to the CEO of the company, or you're communicating to your colleagues, peers, or people that report to you, finding a really powerful way to remind people about the why we're doing this is critically important. You know, change is hard. As you know, you live in a world of change, and it can easily hit roadblocks and a lot of naysayers, and it can fall apart. You can end up with a dead initiative. To me, the biggest reason those failures happen is somebody forgot the why, or forgot to remind somebody what the why is, or forgot to get into a communication cadence around the why we're doing this, what the expected end goal looks like, why this is going to have a great impact on the organization. Once the whys stop happening, whether it's organizational alignment and support for your initiative, capital that's flowing in to support the initiative, just emotional energy around it, it starts to dissipate. And it's you can try to catch up, but just like, you know, the reason you got to that spot is you let it go on too long. If you don't do the why reminders frequently enough and communicate to the right people in the right ways around the whys, things will, you know, cascade against you, and it's hard to catch up.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's a good reminder. I mean, that's a good comment for anyone that's a leader in general. I mean, just to be able to state the why we're doing what we're doing, why we're all here, why are we in business, and certainly when you start imposing change on people, or something that could be perceived as imposing change on people, and if they don't understand it, they're probably not going to get on board, and they're probably not going to help you. So, you know, maybe when you hire your first employee at Ninja Nation, you know, there's a certain amount of coercion you could do to sort of get that one person to sort of stay in line or whatever. But once you get to 100, 1,000, 10,000 employees, they've all been around for a long time, and now all of a sudden you're trying to change things. They do need to understand the why. That's a good point.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, good. Well, thanks for being here, Wayne. This was a really good conversation. And I think, you know, I like this conversation because it's relevant to companies of all sizes. You know, I think there's a lot of small business owners and small business teams that listen, but there's also, you know, big multinational companies that are listening to this interview, that this is all relevant no matter what size company you are, whether you're a Ninja Nation that's growing, you know, shooting up like a rocket, or whether you're a big, mature, established global company that's just trying to get out of a rut, or just trying to get into the 2020s or whatever the case may be, that a lot of these lessons apply regardless. So it's good stuff.
Absolutely. Happy to do it, bud. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. How do people find more about Ninja Nation? What's the website? Where do we find you on social media?
Yeah, go to ninjanation.com. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, under Ninja Nation, or come into one of our facilities. Come check it out, and come get your ninja on.
All right. Thanks a lot, Wayne. Thanks for being here. Really enjoy having you on the show. It's fascinating stuff, and quite a different angle than what we've seen with other guests and other discussions we've had on the show. So really appreciate having you here today. In fact, it was so interesting that Kyler and I have some follow-up discussion and things we want to unpack that we're going to get to right after a quick break. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology-agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, Our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstageconsulting.com.
Welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Kyler. New episodes every Wednesday on YouTube and all the usual podcast platforms. Be sure to subscribe to us there, and also check us out on social media as well if you haven't already. You can find us on LinkedIn and Twitter and TikTok, Instagram. I'm sure I'm forgetting a platform somewhere in there, Kyler, but you can find us on social media. You just go look for Third Stage and or Eric Kimberling. You'll find us there. How about that?
There you go. Beautiful.
Yep. We post lots of good stuff there every day. So if you follow us, you'll get those updates throughout the day and throughout the week. So we just had Wayne Cavanaugh on talking about Ninja Nation, but also talking about his experience as a private equity investor and some of the things that it takes to scale a smaller mid-sized company. So what were some of your observations or thoughts after hearing Wayne talk and some of the questions we had there?
Yeah, what a great interview. I would first like to say that that's the most genius business model ninja I've seen. We have a ninja studio. I don't even know if that's what they call it, but something similar near us. And I have a 2.5-year-old, and I've called them multiple times, begging them to like take him for some of their classes. Cause he it's in gymnastics and kind of needs the next level there. So we'll be calling Wayne, for will be customers. But I think that, in starting with his private equity background, understanding what that looks like to secure funding and all of those different types of things. I don't know about you, Eric, but I can't think of better backgrounds to kind of start as an entrepreneur and just understanding how to structure businesses. And so I wondered kind of what you thought as far as, obviously Third Stage has tons of private equity clients and what that looks like. But just that understanding, would you say, is that a huge asset to being an entrepreneur and just understanding how to optimize business operations?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think it's something you constantly have to be doing. Certainly when you're starting up a company, the focus is more on some of the things he talked about, like not so much efficiency per se, but even though he did talk about efficiency, and efficiency is important when you're starting out, but usually you're more focused on top line revenue growth. Let's just make a name for ourselves. Let's get the word out. Let's get some customers. Let's generate some revenue. And he was talking about the, when you enter in the consent forms, and then it goes into their system, and then you start getting the marketing emails to all the parents who bring their kids to a party that aren't necessarily direct customers yet of Ninja Nation, but they're attending a party that someone else that's actually a customer of Ninja Nation is hosting. They go in, they fill out the consent form, and then they start marketing to them. So I think that was a good example of what startups are thinking about. And not that you can't be thinking about that later. You should still be thinking about that later in your life cycle, but that's probably a higher priority early on, is to just get the business, get new customers. And he found an innovative and creative way to take something that he legally has to do, which is to get these consent forms or waivers signed by the parents that are bringing their kids to Ninja Nation, but then he's marketing to those parents that are bringing the kids to the party. So I think that's a brilliant use of technology and operational improvement, something that's not necessarily in the startup playbook, but he sort of figured out or cracked the code on how to spread the word through the indirect customers as well.
Yeah, and we talk about that here at Third Stage a lot, is just that automation. And I think as a startup or a business owner, having those processes that just happens, that you don't need to actively be a part of, or more importantly, allocate resources or funds to manage, is so important. This conversation is actually really interesting for me because I am a franchisee. I own a franchise. I thought it was super interesting to listen to him about what that looks like in setting the foundation for the actual franchise process through systems. Because I know in my experience, that can be one of the biggest bottlenecks is you're like, oh, I have to use this certain system and I have to use this certain process. And instead of creating that as almost a pain point for franchisees, he made that a part of the overall value of, investing in that business. So have you seen that before in areas in which, or is it one of those things that you wish maybe entrepreneurs or small business owners or even large businesses focused on the system piece before they kind of expanded into the franchise? Because I imagine you must work with clients that have different locations and everything's kind of all over the place, right?
Yeah. It's interesting you ask that question because I have a book. I was looking at my bookshelf here. There's a book that I'm not locating right now, nor am I going to spend the next 5 minutes looking for it. But there's a book called E-Myth. I think it's called E-Myth Revisited or E-Myth Remastered. And it's a book about how to truly scale a small business, you need to think about your systems and your processes and your people from a franchising perspective. You have to think about it from the perspective of, if I'm going to grow, even if I'm not going to add new locations, even if I'm just going to grow from one person or 5 people up to 50 or 100 people, I have to think of my business as more of a playbook. I've got the blueprint, I've got the playbook that I'm going to use. I'm going to train people on it. We're going to have a consistent way of operating, and that's the way you truly scale without losing that secret sauce of whatever made you successful in the first place. So in his case, it was the birthday parties and the unique customer experience, and he's found a way to replicate that at multiple locations, so he doesn't have to be there doing it for everyone. He can train his franchisees on it and all that stuff. So, but I think to answer your question, even someone that's not in franchising should be thinking like a franchisor, because you can build the same sorts of processes and systems and human organizational change, people sides of things to scale your company faster. And you're gonna scale a lot faster if you have that stuff figured out than if you're just trying to patch together broken processes and things that may or may not work.
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting way to look at it. And I wonder, when it comes to franchisees, is there any sort of specific ERP vendors or systems that come to mind that kind of specialize in that space that you've seen be really successful?
With franchisors in particular?
Yes.
No, not really. I mean, I think that's more industry and business model driven. So, certain industries or certain business models are going to have different needs that lead you to different sorts of ERP systems. One thing I'd say, though, that I actually thought of earlier in the segment as you were asking an unrelated question was, and it relates back to this about ERP and how you fit it in, is back to that example I was giving that he gave, or that I was referring to, that he talked about, where he was marketing to the parents that filled out the consent forms. That's a great example of how, if you sit back and just say, well, I'm just going to put in an ERP system and that's going to sort of give me the best practices for how to grow a company, I can assure you that any ERP system you might have put in, or he might have put in to his company, would not have given him that answer or led him to that conclusion that he should be gathering information in the consent forms and then marketing to them. That's a process and a unique little nuance of his business model that he defined, that he created, and now he figured out how to use technology to automate that. So I think that's just one micro example of how, if you're growing a company, or even if you're an established company, you can't just defer to the ERP system and assume that the ERP system is going to tell you how to run your business, especially when it comes to your secret sauce and those things that make you really successful. Maybe with accounting or invoicing or purchasing, some of those more vanilla commodity-based processes, you might be able to do that. But when it comes to like the nuances of your business model and your secret sauce, you don't want to do that. So that's not at all what you just asked me, but it led me back to that.
But important.
Point earlier.
But important. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I do. We always talk about the importance of a clear and aligned strategy before you bring the tech to your overall business process. So I think that's definitely a great point to showcase. And then, so Wayne started his business in a very interesting time, right?
Yeah, right during a pandemic, or right shortly before a pandemic.
He really kind of took the approach of of taking times to focus on his people. And I think that change management mindset of getting your team through that. And I wondered if you would kind of talk about what that looks like for change management in times of uncertainty, and kind of utilize that example of how you took care of his people, and that then made the business more profitable, and his overall ROI, greater.
Yeah, it is an interesting point because it's a hard thing to measure and it's a hard thing to pinpoint, the people's side of things. Especially, it was interesting hearing him say that because I tend to stereotype sometimes with private equity types and think that they're all about the dollars and cents and the things that you can see and touch and feel on a balance sheet or a P&L statement. But he has that knowledge, or seems to understand that there is an ROI to the human side, even if you can't directly measure it all the time or easily. So I think, that creating that culture, that environment where people like to be there. He talked a bit about how they'll hire younger kids, in high school or college or whatever. And the going in assumption is they're probably going to move on to their whatever they do later in life. They're probably doing this job as sort of an interim, shorter term sort of a job. And they sort of embrace that and say, well, let's make them better and better equipped for their careers in the future. And I think that's a totally different mindset than if you just are hiring someone that is only going to be around for 6 or 12 months or 18 months or whatever it is. And you treat them differently because they're only going to be there for 6 or 12 or 18 months. They just fully embrace it and say, yep, they're probably not going to be here long, but let's make them as successful as we can in this job and hopefully in their future job. So it's a really interesting, I thought that was super interesting because I'd never heard an entrepreneur or a business person talk about people in that regard, especially in the services industry where attrition is so high and turnover is so high. So I thought that was super interesting. But to your question, though, I'm doing a really good job of totally evading all of your questions here today, or at least I think I'm doing a good job of it. But back to your question about the change piece of it, I think that's really important for a lot of organizations to think about because there's so much change happening in the world with not just the pandemic, but even before the pandemic, you had technology change and organizational changes and business models changing, industries getting disrupted all the time, and now certainly sort of not that the dust is completely settling yet from the pandemic, but it has totally shifted or changed the way the world looks and the economy works. And so you have a lot of businesses that are struggling. You have a lot of businesses that are actually benefiting from COVID and growing even faster than they were before. You have businesses that have new regulatory hurdles. You have a lot of M&A activity now, a lot of mergers and acquisitions happening with, the sort of the economic fallout from the pandemic. So a lot of change happening, so you have to think about the people in many ways. So that's the key thing is to keep that in mind.
Absolutely, yeah, and that kind of goes back to our initial conversation about Odoo and thinking through kind of a people or team first approach when you are implementing a new technology or going through any sort of disruption within your industry or the overall social climate. So I think Wayne, gave a real kind of level-headed and mindful answer to that when it came to that. And I was surprised to hear it too, because usually, especially the financial guys aren't always too concerned with the overall culture of the business. But it sounds like, he has some great assets to offer that conversation as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember thinking, hearing him talk, in personal gatherings and whatnot, hearing him talk about his business, I would ask him, how are you doing and how's this affecting your business? And I remember thinking, man, that's, is he going to make it? Is that company going to survive through the pandemic? But they found a way to quickly pivot. It sounds like, sort of like what we experienced at Third Stage. I mean, we had that sort of 4 to 8 weeks, I want to say it was, where it was almost, for me anyway, I was completely panicked. I thought, oh, wow, this is not going to be good for us. And you get to the other side, you learn to pivot. We invested in digital. Turns out a lot of businesses needed more help after the pandemic. So our business actually has more than doubled since the pandemic started. So we've been fortunate in that way. And it sounds like he was too, but I would not have guessed that his business would have thrived the way it has. And now it's, doing better than ever with all the franchising. And he has a lot of investors that want to buy franchises, and he's sort of vetting them out as he goes. So I think that's a testament to, what a good business model will do, what a solid business model will do. Your focus on people, your focus on systems and processes. You get that recipe right, and suddenly, you've got people beating at your door wanting to be a part of it, either as investors or franchisees, or, they want to join your team, or they might want to buy your company, or whatever the case may be, or customers just want to buy your product or service. So the more you invest in all that stuff, including the people side, just the more value you're creating as a business and the more successful you're going to be. So I think there's absolutely an ROI to it, to get back to your previous question.
Yeah, definitely. And we take that same approach that he mentioned of kind of letting the customer run your marketing strategy, and how that they want to experience the business. And of course, you have overall KPIs that you monitor and want to see growth and progress. But at the same time, that listening component, not only within communicating your business strategy, but also within your internal culture that we talk about so much, was something that he had mentioned as a main piece of his customer-facing process too. So I thought that was, a great point, and really listening to his community.
Yeah, absolutely. And he also talked about, speaking of listening to the community and to the customers, he talked about that whole, I don't know if he used the exact words, but customer experience, sort of what does this look like to the customer, and that outside in look to the way he built the company versus a lot of organizations we work with tend to be more inwardly focused. They're focused on themselves and how they can make their jobs easier and all that good stuff. That's important, but it doesn't really matter if you fix all that if you're not really improving the customer experience or somehow making your product or service more desirable, or you're delivering it more effectively with new technology or processes or in people improvement. So I thought that was an interesting nuance too, is really taking that, not getting too inwardly focused, but also looking at your customer and your external stakeholders to figure out, how you can make the business better.
Sure. I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think this is a great interview for anyone that is thinking about starting up a business or optimizing a small business, and wrapping in the systems piece as really kind of the forward facing strategy to being able to scale, and making sure those processes are really tightened up, aligned, and efficient. So I know I learned a lot from Wayne.
It was great to have him on. And I think even if you're a larger, more mature organization, you could argue that you could learn even more from it, because there's so much you could do differently to be more entrepreneurial, more nimble, more agile, all those buzzwords that are big today. You can learn a lot from the small and mid-sized companies like Ninja Nation. So
absolutely. Good
to have him on. Well, that was a good discussion. Thanks for your time today, and thank you to the audience for listening today. Thanks to Wayne for being here today. I really appreciate his joining the show today. So again, you can find us with new episodes every Wednesday on YouTube and all the podcast platforms. Follow us on social media. Check out the links below. We've got a lot of resources that we link to on our website, videos, downloads, all that good stuff. So be sure to check that stuff out as well. And in the meantime, have a great rest of your week, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Transformation Ground Control. Have a great week. We'll see you all soon. Take care.